this is the table of contents. I wanted to just pause on this and show you how this legal document has been organized. We have an introduction, which is sort of a statement of the facts. So all of this is kind of combined in together, but just on a high level, I didn't cover all of this stuff in my slides. We do have a lot of slides, a lot of reading to get through, but you'll notice it says the statement of the facts. Donald Trump refused to accept the results of the 2020 election. He also encouraged his followers to come to Washington. Mike Pence refused to overturn the election results. It's sort of a recount of what happened. And then Donald Trump incites the insurrectionists to attack the Capitol. So we're going to spend some time on that one. Insurrectionists incited by President Trump attack the Capitol. President Trump's dereliction of duty after the attack. So see how the scope is getting way bigger. Now they're talking about what happened after the fact. Then they're also saying the House approves an article of impeachment with bipartisan support. And they have a big quote in there. I didn't put it in here from Liz Cheney. You know, they're really happy that they got some Republicans who are also upset about this stuff. Then we get into the argument. And a lot of this, I just took out the important, pertinent parts. There's a lot of old history and old language, and they're comparing it to other prior cases, other prior impeachment proceedings. But the main arguments are that he committed a high crime and misdemeanor. And I'm talking, of course, about President Trump. He violated his oath of office, attacked the democratic process, imperiled Congress, undermined national security. Those are the main arguments. Then they're saying there is no defense. So this is sort of a pre-buttal. They're anticipating what Donald Trump and his defense team are going to be saying, and then they're rebutting it before they say it. They're saying that there was no defense for Trump's conduct. The impeachment process that took place in the House was fair. There was strong evidence of criminality. The election results are not in question, and free speech is not an issue, which is going to be very interesting to see because it's a free speech argument. The Senate has jurisdiction to try this impeachment, and this is a big part of this entire document. So you're going to see here from page 48 down to about page 71. That's all about jurisdiction. It's talking about the Constitutional Convention, the constitutional text and the structure, and they're going back to former officials in England, early American states were subject to impeachment and disqualification. And this is where we're talking a lot about the jurisdiction of the Senate. This has been a major argument, and I think this is where the crux of the case is going to lay. Remember that I think last week it was Rand Paul submitted or passed a resolution calling for a vote, and he wanted all of the other senators to make a mark. Where do you stand on this? Do you think this is a constitutional proceeding or not? And I think 44 of them said, no, it's not constitutional because the Senate doesn't have jurisdiction. So I think truthfully, I think the impeachment trial is a foregone conclusion. I think Trump's going to be acquitted again a second time, which will be historical for him, trying to be impeached twice and acquitted twice. All right, so let's get into the introduction. This is how it starts. And I'm going to kind of try to go through this a little bit fast because I don't want to just be reading all day here. But it says the trial arises from President Donald Trump's incitement of insurrection. They're saying he swore to protect the republic and he didn't do that. Now the Senate should disqualify him. And they go through a little bit of history here. On January 6th, Vice President presiding, blah, 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 blah. The ritual has a mark of peaceful transfer of power, and everything was kumbaya until President Trump. You see that 3-word sentence there? Until President Trump. Okay, got it. In his grievous betrayal of his oath of office, Donald Trump, and there we see this again, he incited a violent mob to attack the U.S. Capitol. And so they're saying he did something. Okay, he was the actor. He specifically incited the attack. And so we're looking for them to prove that. They stormed the Capitol. They yelled out, "Hang Mike Pence, traitor, traitor, traitor." They assaulted everybody. And then many officials barely escaped the rioters, and Congress's counting of the electoral votes was delayed until nightfall and not completed until 4 a.m. And I don't think that had anything to do with the rioters. We saw that there were 2 other objections. I think Josh Hawley was objecting to Pennsylvania, and somebody else was, if I can remember correctly, was objecting to Georgia. And so, they got back into the congressional building, I would say maybe 8 o'clock. Arizona time, and then they counted for another 4 or 5 hours until 4 a.m. And I'm not sure what time zone they're using, but many people are saying this is a coup. And you look at what happens in Myanmar, formerly Burma, and okay, that's a coup. They were back to work in like 4 hours, 5 hours, and they finished the job that same day. So I don't know how in jeopardy the control of the federal government was here in the United States, but based on what I saw, it wasn't even remotely close. Not even, a tenth of 1%, maybe 100th of 1% likelihood that they were going to get control of this country, maybe a millionth of 1%. It was not happening. And, and now they're sort of going through this big, spiel here, and they're being very dramatic about it as they go through the language. But this is what you should do in a legal brief, right? You want to state your case. You're being argumentative. And so you can't fault them for that. They're making their claim, and they know that people like me and people throughout the media are going to cover this stuff. And so they want to be very aggressive and colorful with their language. That's why they say things like grievous betrayal, incited a violent mob attack. It's an argumentative document. It's not a formal, I would say, legal memorandum where you are not making an argument, you're just reporting on what the law is. They're being very aggressive. This is kind of their opening argument that they know the media and the American people are going to gobble up. So let's get back to it. Trump's responsibility for the events on January 6th is unmistakable. So now we're going back directly to the January 6th date. Okay. After losing in 2020, he refused to accept the will of the American people, and he spent months asserting without evidence. So they're saying without any evidence that he won in a landslide. But every single court to consider the president's attacks on the outcome rejected them. And we spent a lot of time on this channel. We talked a lot about whether the courts actually heard evidence, and some of them heard, I would say, very, very minimal evidence. But most of these lawsuits were dismissed on mootness, ripeness, latches. Any standing was a huge issue. They were all basically nothing. I don't think I saw a single lawsuit, we probably covered 20 of them here, that ever reached the merits of the underlying claims. And I still, to this day, have not seen a single lawsuit that tells us whether or not the courts can just, on their own, sua sponte, without any outside influence, change the rules of the election. Because that is what happened. We talked about that. Now, the Supreme Court has declined to hear those cases. So some legal commentators will say, well, we know that they can. They actually can, because in Pennsylvania, the Supreme Court changed how the election was supposed to be conducted. And that was in contravention to what the Pennsylvania legislature said was part of Act 77. It was already in the law. The Supreme Court said, hey, we got COVID now, we got to change all these things. They changed the rules at the last minute, and those cases went up to appeal in the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, we're not getting involved. We're not going to hear the case. And so other commentators are saying, okay, well, the Supreme Court, that was their opinion. They chimed in and they said, no, we're not going to hear it. And so they say, well, so everybody refers to that and says, okay, well, that means that what the court did was okay. The Supreme Court is not upset about that. They're not going to overturn that. They're not even going to weigh in on it. So they're allowed to continue to do that. And if you're satisfied with that, if you're somebody who's on that side of the argument and you think that's we got what we needed, right? The Supreme Court says you can do that. Well, then you can just take that one step further, and every single court throughout the entire United States now at this point in time can change the rules. That's the precedent. And so for many people like me, we're just saying, hey, maybe this is a good time for the Supreme Court to tell us how the hell we can run our elections. Because what happened here is we had legislatures passing laws and rules, Supreme Courts changing them, the legislature delegating this stuff over to the executive branch of the state government. So governors and board of electors and electoral commissions and all of these different executive branch, secretary of states and all of that, they can literally take the rules that the legislature embodied in the law and modify them at will. That happened in multiple places around the country. And many people were just wondering, is that okay? Can we keep doing that? And we never got an answer from the Supreme Court. So they're saying that there was without evidence, right? No evidence. Don't mention the hundreds of affidavits, the hundreds of hours of testimony that was given, none of the procedural violations that took place, like the observation stuff, never heard. A lot of the audits were not conducted completely, whether there were, any transparency issues with data providers and how to account for all of these little permutations here and there. It just never got heard. So there was some evidence, but it never got into many different courts. The only one, in all fairness, that I think actually did something was Arizona, where they did a partial audit. They redid the audit, and it didn't show much of anything. So they dumped that case. Now they're appealing it. It's going on and on and on. But most of these other cases were just not heard. So I think that is a little bit inaccurate. Without evidence, and they attacked the outcome. Every single election court, they're saying, rejected them. I disagree with that. By the end of the day, the end of the rally, Trump spent months. So now they're going backwards. They spent months using his bully pulpit And the joint session of Congress was the final act of the vast plot to destroy America. Love that language. Very powerful language. As a result, and has been widely reported, now we're going in. Watch the scope expand. Now we have Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump's lawyer. His lawyer called for here, trial by combat, all right? Then his son got on there and said, hey, we're coming for you. Finally, then, President Trump jumped in, and this is where we see the language again. We see fight like hell. You're not going to have a country anymore. You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength. You have to be strong, right? And this is the language that is problematic, and they're stacking it on top of this other language from the president's son and from Rudy Giuliani. Now, we will see that there is other language in there from Trump's speech. So this is what he said at 18 minutes and 16 seconds into his Capitol Hill speech. He said, I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. So I just wanted to point that out, right? He also said some other things, and they go in very, very far later down in the document, and they say he did say that, but it was at the beginning of the speech, and everything else that he layered on after that was sort of code language that, you know, I have to say peaceful, but you guys know what I mean, right? You know that I'm just saying that because I have to say that, but I really want you to go and nuke the building, right? That's kind of the implication there. The document goes on. Let's take a look. It says, President Trump committed this high crime and misdemeanor amid his final days in office. Given the clarity of the evidence and the egregiousness of wrongdoing, the House improved the article of impeachment for incitement of insurrection. Presidents do not get a free pass to commit high crimes and misdemeanors near the end of their term. And this is a new argument that we've been seeing a lot of. Basically, it's sort of this, there's no recourse if this impeachment doesn't move forward. In other words, they're saying that a president in the last couple weeks of their term has the full ability to go out there and just break the law willy-nilly. They can do whatever they want because there's no recourse. They cannot be impeached. But they're forgetting that there are many other avenues for repercussions for presidents who do that. Things like criminal charges and special counsels. And you can literally, charge a former president with that. If they're out of office, if they commit a crime their last day in office and they don't pardon themselves, or that, the pardon doesn't extend after they're out of office, then you just have a prosecutor who comes in and charges them with a crime, just like anybody else. They're a private citizen, charge them with a crime, as long as the statute of limitations doesn't expire. So there's a lot of other avenues for that. So we're going to see that argument brought up time and time again in this. Let's go to the statement of facts, get past some of that introduction. President Trump refuses to accept the 2020 election. And this is where they start going into their big laundry list of stuff. Before a single voter cast a vote on 2020 presidential election day, President Trump made it clear he had no intention of abiding by the verdict of the American people. And they're referencing a lot of his tweets, which are no longer available for us to check out. But some of these footnotes are pointing to tweets. In July 2020 interview, he said that he refused to agree that he would accept the results. And so now what they're doing is they're just sort of establishing that Donald Trump has a history of this stuff. He's saying that there was a conspiracy to defraud him, right? And in my opinion, I think Donald Trump believes that, right? And I think a lot of Americans do believe that there was a conspiracy to defraud him. That's his interpretation of it. They disagree with it, but that's what they're upset about. He's saying on August 17th, before the election, the only way we're going to lose is if the election is rigged. It goes on. Trump applied particularly intense pressure to Georgia officials. So I wanted to just point this part out. There's a whole paragraph about that Raffensperger phone call. President Trump tweeted about Raffensperger 17 times. Thanksgiving Day, he called him an enemy of the people. He also said so this is where they now are tying in outside statements. So watch how this goes. Enemy of the people. So on Thanksgiving Day, he said Raffensperger was an enemy of the people. Reflecting an ominous pattern that would recur many times over the weeks that followed, President Trump's on Raffensperger sparked threats of death and violence. And then they just sort of put a brief pause here. One such message warned that, quote, and sort of you read this and you sort of think that Donald Trump said this, and he didn't, but somebody else did. They said the Raffensperger should be put on trial for treason and face execution. So Trump didn't say that. Somebody else did. And now they're including that in this laundry list of problems. Nonetheless, President Trump continued his assault on Raffensperger, and other people told him to stop doing that. President Trump, they campaigned to reverse the election results to keep himself in the White House. Donald Trump reportedly called one of Georgia's election lead investigators, urging him to, quote, find the fraud, and claiming that an official would be a national hero if he did. And this is where he said, I just want to find 11,000 votes, which is more than we have because we won the state. Now, some of this language I don't think is particularly good, right? He said something like, this could be a criminal offense. It's a big risk to you. But when we went through that, we covered this call on this show. It It was borderline. It wasn't anything that I would recommend, anybody say in a settlement conference like that. But in my mind, it still was a settlement conference. And what he was saying wasn't necessarily inaccurate. So, that's the purpose of a settlement conference, is to discuss the issues candidly. It's to be very open about it. When we do it in criminal law, can bring the whole family into court, and the family can ask the prosecutor point blank, hey, why do you want to send my son to prison for 10 years for marijuana? Why do you want to do that? And the prosecutor can say that, and they can say, yeah, well, how about this, right? And you can get into it a little bit. It's kind of the whole point of a settlement conference. You got to reach a settlement, and you have to hash out the issues, which in my mind is all they were doing on that day. So let's move on. Under Section B, we have President Trump encourages his followers to come to Washington on January 6th to fight. So we're using this language again in parentheses. We got fight, fight, fight. Every single politician in the history of the country has said that word at some point in their time, in their elected time, to rally their supporters to do something. Everybody says fight. Following the Electoral College count vote, President Trump fixated on January 6th, the date of the joint session, presenting his last best hope to reverse the election, even as he continued improperly pressuring state officials, DOJ, and members of Congress to overturn the electoral outcome. He sharply escalated his public statements using incendiary and violent language to urge supporters to, quote, stop the steal. That's where he says it was rigged, stolen, fight like hell, fight to the death, act of war, can't let it happen, won't take it anymore. Okay, so now they're defining the other language. We already saw that they were unhappy that he said, fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. So they're just going through and identifying other language that they can lump into this big impeachment document. Can't let it happen, won't take it anymore. And then he said, come to the rally, it's going to be wild. Indeed, it was obvious and entirely foreseeable that the furious crowd assembled before President Trump was primed and prepared for violence if he lit a spark. Okay, which is accurate. It sounds like it was accurate. It was foreseeable. The government knew about it. Sounds like the FBI knew about it. They were arresting the Proud Boys. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez knew about it. I think the only people who didn't know about it were the ones responsible for security on that day. Mayor Bowser disavowed the feds. The sergeant of arms didn't like the optics of it. These Democrat authors, they knew about it. Why didn't they tell anybody? Why didn't AOC tell anybody? Maybe this whole thing could have been avoided. On January 6th, President Trump and others, they attempted to overturn the election, failed, including his schemes at the DOJ. On January 4th, he gave an angry speech in Dalton. Democrats are trying to steal the White House. You can't let it happen. You can't let it happen. They're taking this White House. We're going to fight like hell. I'm telling you right now. All right, so they're going back before January 6th, all the way to January 4th. They have another one on January 5th, and they're just referencing every single tweet, right? Tweet December 26, December 26. We have a number 42, January 1st. We have some other ones down here, and a rally speech. In all these ways and more, as we will show at trial, President Trump created a powder keg on January 6th. Hundreds were prepared for violence in his direction. They were prepared to do whatever it took to keep him in power. All they needed to hear was that their president needed to, quote, fight like hell. Needed them to fight like hell. All they needed was for President Trump to strike a match. So you see the narratives changing, right? Now it's everything was percolating already, and Donald Trump was the one responsible for creating that rising tide, and then he just turned it loose, which is different than the original language that we saw in the original article and in the political commentary. Paragraph D, Section D, President Trump does incite the insurrectionist to attack the Capitol. So this is sort of the big question. All right, if he incited the insurrectionists, how did he do it? Shortly before noon, he took the stage, and there was a podium. There was his lawyer previously, trial by combat, so they're referencing that. Now, this is evidence that they're referencing. This is why I keep talking about this. They're including other language from other people that are not Donald Trump. We've got Rudy Giuliani. Donald Trump praised Rudy Giuliani, saying he's got guts, he fights, which he did. He was flying all over the country fighting. Over the following hour, President Trump reiterated claims that Democrats had stolen the election, and then he exhorted to the crowd, fight much harder, stop the steal, take back our country. Right? Once again, same language that everybody uses. He also demanded that Vice President Pence illegally interfere, and the crowd assembled to stop the massive fraud taking place at the Capitol. At numerous points during the rally, he urged the crowd toward the Capitol, where the joint session was about to start. 20 minutes into the rally, Trump said that those marching on the Capitol should do so peacefully. So you see that? We gave you that full quote in context, but they just say here peacefully. But then they say he spoke. And then it just goes on into this laundry list you can see here. For another 50 minutes, using highly inflammatory rhetoric, exactly the kind of language calculated to incite violence. So how do you determine that? How do you determine what that is? What kind of standard is that? Anything you say that somebody does something bad as a result of listening to you, you're responsible for that now? And how do they know how this was calculated based on the statements? Did they intend that to happen? Do you really think Donald Trump intended for the Capitol building to be stormed? The language was calculated to incite violence, given what had been reported about the crowd. He declared, we fight like hell. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. So this is the language they're very upset about that they keep referencing. Videos of the crowd eliminate any doubt that his words, in fact, incited the crowd to commit violence. He told the crowd, you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength. Supporters can be heard loudly shouting, take the Capitol right now, invade the Capitol building. Don't know if Donald Trump knew that. Don't know if he was giving him a thumbs up. Okay, I hear you. Go do it. He just said something and people ran with it. And so now they're trying to connect that back to him, which is such a dangerous precedent. I can't even tell you how dangerous that is. I mean, you can understand that, right? I mean, if you say something, anything, and somebody interprets it one way and does something about that, you want to be held accountable for that? There's a lot of wild people in this world who will do things. That's on them, not on you. They're trying to make speech incredibly dangerous. And it's not, folks. At another point, the crowd interrupting him with chants of fight for Trump. The president did not try to soothe their aggression because it was at a rally. He smiled and said, thank you, thank you. As the crowd instantly recognized the tenor of his speech and his repeated demand that they, quote, fight like hell and show strength, belied any desire for a peaceful demonstration. Those who come to the rally looking for a signal from their president found it in his remarks. Rather than quell the crowd, urge peaceful demonstration, which he did, by the way, or promise to carry on the fight over the years to come, the overwhelming thrust of President Trump's remarks delivered to an armed, angry crowd widely known to be prepared for violence. Oh, it just drives me nuts. If it was so widely known, why were they not prepared for it? He said that this article says this was a militaristic demand that they must fight to stop what was occurring in the Capitol at that very moment. So Donald Trump, in his speech, gave a militaristic command to his followers to go overtake the Capitol building. Did they watch the same speech that I watched? All right. Paragraph E says, insurrectionist incited by President Trump then attacked the Capitol. Now what we have in the next, I think, 7 pages from page 22 to 29 is a lot of this stuff. So they go through sort of a litany of all the problems that happened after the breach. And they said, provoked and incited by President Trump, who told them to, quote, fight like hell. Again, they're going to keep saying that. Hundreds of insurrectionists arrived at the Capitol, launched an assault, a seditious, deadly attack against the legislative branch and vice president without parallel in American history. And they said a bunch of awful things. Hang Mike Pence, tell Pelosi we're coming for her. Capitol Police dragged furniture to barricade the House chamber. So they're just going through and they're saying terrible, terrible. Capitol Police strike, terrible. Gunshots were heard outside. Got it. Terrible. Once inside, insurrectionists desecrated and vandalized the Capitol. Got it. Mark it. Some erected gallows. Got that. Rummaged through. Yes, I know. Live stream video. And then declared that our president wants us here. Okay, so did Donald Trump call them and tell them that? These are people interpreting his language and they're using it for their own ends. Okay, so another one says she answered the call of her president, echoing the views of other participants. So it's just about 7 pages of what we saw, right? We all saw it happen. It was grotesque behavior. I'm not endorsing it at all. I just don't think that Donald Trump giving a speech is what caused it. I think there were a lot of other things that were leading up to that. And just to say that Donald Trump, by giving a speech and by, complaining about the election for a couple months, caused all of that single-handedly is ridiculous. President Trump's dereliction of duty during the attack. So now they're going to go through and they're going to lump in everything that happened after it. So apparently this is somehow evidence of incitement because of what happened after. I don't know if he's going to incite another thing or whatever, but this is after the fact. They're upset about it. Armed insurrectionists breached the Capitol, and as Vice President Pence, Congress, and they described it, borderline enthusiastic. It meant the certification was being derailed, according to somebody. Senior administration officials described Trump as delighted. They report that he was walking around the White House confused by why other people on his team weren't excited as he was, and against Capitol Police trying to get into the building. These feelings were reflected by his actions, and this is where you're basically mind reading. All of this stuff in most situations would never get into court. It's hearsay. It's other people saying what other people were doing and saying. It's hearsay documents. Or hearsay statements. Here, what did Donald Trump say? What did Donald Trump do? What were his specific actions? And now they're trying to say his actions match the narrative that they got from some insiders, some leakers somewhere inside the organization. 149 insurrectionists had overcome the perimeter. 2:24, 30 minutes later, while rioters were still attacking the police, Trump posted a tweet. And he said Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution. I disagreed with that tweet. I thought it was a bad tweet. It was not appropriate given what was going on. But what does that have to do with him inciting the insurrection? It does. In my mind, it has basically nothing to do with it. Okay, it's Mike Pence. It's a political disagreement. Donald Trump said that he should have been able to do something. We talked about this here on the show. Mike Pence didn't have the authority to do it. I've been a big defender of Mike Pence on this channel. I think that he had no lawful authority, no constitutional authority to choose an uncertified slate of electors over a certified slate of electors. There's nothing in the Constitution or in any of the rules that we read that gives him the ability to do that, and he didn't do that. Donald Trump had a political disagreement about that, and there are a lot of people, and there's even some constitutional, attorneys and people who say, this is up for debate. Not that Mike Pence has the authority to do it, but just that the rules aren't clear. And we went through the rules here. We went through, Section 15 of the U.S. Code. We looked at that. Section 12, Section 7 through 12, 7 through 15. There's a lot of them. We covered them on this channel. You can have some reasonable disagreement and some reasonable debate about that. Donald Trump was expressing that. Was it an appropriate time to do that? No, not at all. Right? At that moment, in my mind, it should have been something that was all hands on deck. And he didn't respond that way. But is that a crime, or is that just leadership that I disagree with? Right? And it wasn't that much longer. At 2:24, then he made that statement. Then shortly thereafter at 3:13, he issued a second statement and other additional tweets. So 2:38 and 3:13, he issued a second. Those tweets told his followers then, and I was there, we were following this minute by minute here in my office. I was, support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. Stay peaceful. All right, that went out. And then he sent another one. He asked everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful, no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. These tweets were obviously totally ineffectual at stopping the violence. They did not reflect any substantial effort on the part of the president to protect Congress, which is just an opinion statement. He came out. He gave the appropriate statement. Came a little bit late, but you don't know what the circumstances were for him. How informed he was. I'm not real sure that they knew what the hell was going on there, right? At one point in time, we played videos of law enforcement opening the doors to people, welcoming everybody in. So if Donald Trump got that report and said, yeah, there's disorder over there, but I don't know that people are being killed. I don't see the havoc that's being caused. He could have been en route right back to the White House in a car, and nobody really told him what was going on. Who knows, right? I don't know. Neither did they. But they're just jumping into conclusions, and they're saying that he was inciting insurrection by not responding appropriately to the insurrection, sort of welcoming the insurrection, which I don't think there's any evidence for that. The violence he had provoked, unsurprisingly, continued after President Trump released his video. So they want him to release a video, then he does release a video, and it's unsurprisingly ineffective. So the guy can't do anything. If he releases a video, it's not effective. If he doesn't release a video, he should have released a video. Then Donald Trump has another tweet later in the night, also very Trump, and not something I endorse or agree with. But that's Trump, and this is what he said. He said, these are things and events that happen when a sacred landslide election victory is so unceremoniously and viciously stripped away from the great patriots who have been badly and unfairly treated for so long. Go home with love and in peace. Remember this day forever. He posted that at 6:01 on January 6th. I don't have a defense of that tweet. I don't think I wouldn't have ever said anything like that if I were in his position, but he felt the need to say it. And is that a crime to say that? I think a lot of people in the country were probably feeling that way. Not endorsing that feeling, just telling you. This goes on. The House approved an article of impeachment with bipartisan support. All right, so in light of the crisis, 5 days after the assault on the Capitol, articles of impeachment were introduced and signed. And during this hearing, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee submitted a 50-page report documenting the committee's findings in support of impeachment, which I never saw that, right? We never saw that. At the conclusion of this hearing, the Rules Committee adopted a recorded vote, a special rule providing for House debate on the resolution. That's their introduction. That's their facts. So you see how much bigger the scope gets. It's now everything Trump said, everything he said before, everything he said after, all of his conduct during. It's all within the purview now. Then it changes gear and we start talking about the defense. There is no defense for President Trump's conduct. Every argument that may be raised, this is wild, every argument that may be raised in President Trump's defense further demonstrates that he is a danger to our democratic system of government. So one more time, any argument that may be raised, this says every argument that may be raised in President Trump's defense further demonstrates that he is a danger to our democratic system of government. So if you even make an argument to defend yourself, you're a threat to democracy. That's what that says. Look at it. Read it. If you even raise a defense now, it just shows, it further demonstrates what a danger to our democratic system of government you are. All right. I guess that's one way to run a country. Fair impeachment process. Then he incited a mob to attack Congress during the joint session. The House's expeditious response to this attack was both necessary and appropriate. There was no doubt that Congress will act decisively in favor of such extraordinary abuse, which threaten not only the peaceful transfer of power, but also the very lives of senior government officials. Any claim that the House moved too quickly in responding to the violent insurrection that President Trump incited is mistaken, as they say. And this is where we learn a little bit about their thoughts. They are a grand jury and a prosecutor, the House is, under the Constitution. The events that form the basis for the impeachment occurred in plain view. They are well known to the American people. Many members of Congress were witness to its conduct. There is no basis on which President Trump could assert what a horrified nation saw with its own eyes and heard with its own ears. Accordingly, the House acted within its constitutional responsibilities in swiftly and emphatically approving an article of impeachment. So I love when I see legal documents that say there's no basis for something. Well, there's no basis. Well, Trump's legal team just came up with a basis. If it occurred in plain view, then why are we saying plain view? If it's so well known, if it's so mistaken, very conclusory language, sort of sloppy legal drafting, in my opinion. But Trump has some sloppy legal drafting too. We're going to get there in a minute. Criminality is another defense that they say is not justified. The Constitution authorizes impeachment and conviction for high crimes and misdemeanors. As Hamilton explained in the Federalist Papers, impeachable offenses are of a nature with which may be peculiar propriety and be denominated political, as they relate chiefly to injuries done immediately to society itself. So what Alexander Hamilton is saying is that this is a political trial. Offenses against the Constitution are different than offenses against the criminal code. The only question here is whether President Trump committed offenses justifying the conviction and disqualification from future office holding. Right? So he agrees it's a political trial. So that's what they're referencing. So Donald Trump, one of the original arguments here was that he didn't get a fair shake in the House of Representatives. It was called a snap impeachment. They did it very quickly. Jonathan Turley has a good article about that on his website if you want to read through it. But it happened very quickly with not much due process. And so this argument is that the impeachment was fair because Donald Trump wasn't entitled to due process. He didn't get any of those same benefits that you would get if you were being charged or indicted with a crime. I mean, the House in this own article says that they are prosecutors and a grand jury. Well, if you're a prosecutor and you get indicted in a grand jury, you have some due process in those things, right? They don't just get to do whatever the hell they want with you in your case. There are some rules, case law, statutory provisions that say you get some due process in those proceedings. Donald Trump really didn't get any of that. So they're sort of going in here and they're preempting his rebuttal that when he makes the claim that we didn't get a fair shake. They're going to say, yeah, you did, because Alexander Hamilton is acknowledging, just like we all know today, that this is a political trial and you're not entitled to the same stuff. Right? So that's also an argument. Election results. President Trump may persist in asserting that he actually won. He may also suggest that his abuse of office is somehow justified or excused because it was rigged. Any such argument would rest upon demonstrable falsehood about the legitimacy of election results. So I think this is kind of a bait argument. They want him to get in there and talk about the election results. And I just don't think that is going to happen. We're going to get to the Trump team and his defense and their response here shortly. But you have to back this up a little bit. who is the audience? Who is the juror in the Senate? Who are the jurors? Well, technically, it's the senators, right? They're the ones who are going to vote on whether to convict Donald Trump or not. But are they really the audience? Are they really the jurors? Or are there a couple other layers there? Are we also talking about the media? Are we also talking about their constituencies? The senators are sort of placeholders for those two different entities. And I would say the media is probably more important to them than their constituencies, many of them. Not all of them. So what happens if you go in there and you want to relitigate the electoral issues? Well, the media is going to go hog wild over that, right? You're not going to get through that bubble. And many people are sort of over those arguments in their constituencies. And so if Donald Trump and his team went in there and they argued that the election was indeed fraudulent, I think they would alienate the media, of course, and probably alienate enough people in their constituencies that it might warrant them to change their vote and shift course and vote to convict him. And I think the Democrats might want that, right? This rigged election stuff. It's tactically to their advantage. The other argument that they're doing a pre-buttal about is free speech. The First Amendment, they say, exists to protect our democratic system, which is an interesting perspective. It supports the right to vote and ensures a robust public debate. The right of speech and political participation mean little if the president can provoke lawless action if he loses at the polls. So it sounds a little bit circular there, but all right. President Trump's incitement of deadly violence to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power and overturn the results was a direct assault on the core First Amendment principles. Holding him accountable through conviction would vindicate First Amendment freedoms, which certainly offer no excuse or defense for the destructive conduct. Most fundamentally, the First Amendment protects private citizens from the government. It does not protect government officials from accountability for their own abuses in office. So Trump does not get First Amendment protections according to them. Therefore, as scholars from across the political spectrum have recognized, the First Amendment does not apply at all to an impeachment proceeding. So it doesn't count, according to them. The question in this case is not whether to inflict liability or punishment on a private citizen. Instead, the Senate must decide whether to safeguard the nation's constitutional order by disqualifying an official who committed egregious misconduct. As one scholar writes, the First Amendment does not shrink the scope of the impeachment power or alter what conduct would fall within the term of high, and we're missing a word, crimes. We got a couple errors in both these documents, high crimes and misdemeanors. All right. So no free speech. If you're an elected official, if you're the president of the country, you don't get free speech. You don't get to participate in politics. If you say something that leads to something bad, don't come back and say that was free speech, buddy boy. That's not okay. We're still going to impeach the hell out of you because it's a different standard. It's a political standard. They're not impeaching him for the incitement of the insurrection. They're impeaching him for saying dangerous political things that they don't like. They're expanding the scope of this thing that encompasses everything. The constitutional text and the structure, it contains several provisions addressing the impeachment. Careful review of the text and the structure permits a single conclusion, that the Senate has jurisdiction. So this we've talked a lot about, the constitutional text. Specifically, we've talked about the conjunctive phrase there. There's a comma and then the word and. Removal from office, comma, and disqualification from future office. This is where they're addressing that argument. And this is an interesting argument. You know, if you're on the Democratic side, you're looking at this and you're saying, yeah, they're two separate things. They're two separate penalties. You can impose either one of those at will. You can convict somebody if they're already out of office. That's okay. You can just rely on that secondary phrase, the disqualification from running again in the future. Republicans and Trump and I think myself, I fall in this category. It's an and. It's conjunctive. It's removal from office, comma, and disqualification, not or, not removal from office or disqualification. It's and. One precedes the other. I think it's pretty basic statutory construction, but they're not making that claim. They go on. Article 1 of the Constitution defines the power. It uses unqualified language. The House has jurisdiction over the impeachment. Article 1 provides for two separate possible judgments in any impeachment case: removal and disqualification. Nowhere does the Constitution suggest that an impeachment is permitted only when both judgments can be imposed. Instead, it treats them as distinct penalties, mandating only that the Senate not exceed them in rendering the judgment. The separate availability of disqualification without any suggestion that it must necessarily follow removal confirms that former officials like President Trump can be tried by the Senate. Finally, they refer to a person and party and not a civil officer, and I skipped over that argument. Here's the conclusion. President Trump falsely asserted that he won the 2020 election. He sought to overturn its results. He and his supporters filed dozens of lawsuits nationwide, including before judges he had appointed, but their claims uniformly failed to persuade. He also tried to convince state and federal election officials and law enforcement personnel to attempt to reverse the election outcome. Those attempts failed too. The only honorable path at that point was for Trump to accept the results and concede his defeat. Instead, he summoned a mob to Washington, exhorted them into a frenzy, aimed them like a loaded cannon down in Pennsylvania Avenue. As the Capitol was overrun, President Trump reportedly delighted. And rather than take immediate steps to quell the violence, he left his vice president and Congress to fend for themselves. And I think there may have been another paragraph there, but it was just sort of conclusory. Respectfully submitted by these individuals, all Democrats, in the House of Representatives. So that is their memorandum. Largely, I think is pretty good, actually. It's 80 pages. You know, I'm kind of critical of it because I think this whole thing is kind of bubbled down into a charade. And I don't like this new standard where everything that you say is now criminalized or politically controversial. I do not like this concept at all. We're seeing how this is snowballing and trickling down into the rest of the country. We're seeing people deplatformed. We're seeing criminal charges filed for political memes. We're seeing all sorts of egregious stuff. Censorship and down the road. And I just don't like it.